We are going to continue to pull on this thread of generative AI in the creative industries, looking more deeply at media specifically. So I'm going to invite our next moderator to the stage, who's going to lead us through a discussion about generative AI and its impacts on journalism and other types of multimedia. Our next moderator is the deputy editor of the newspaper Sifted. I'd like to welcome Eleanor Warnock to the stage.
Okay, thank you everyone for joining us today. As I was introduced, I'm Eleanor Warnock. I'm deputy editor at Sifted, and I am here to discuss AI for creatives and consumers and how to deploy that responsibly. I'm super excited to be on stage with our two panelists today because not only am I a journalist, I'm also a creative. And so I just love being able to have a conversation and an opportunity to talk through all of the stuff that's going on right now. We've got Jatin, who is Director of Research and Development at the BBC, who has, as we were talking about before, the most incredible job mission ever, which is simply to research, develop, and innovate tech that benefits the BBC and the wider media industry, both here in the UK and also overseas. Incredible job. We've also got Moiya, who's with us from New York, got here yesterday. Monday, okay.
Yeah. A little settled.
So a little bit of time to settle, who wears many hats as an astrophysicist, folklorist, author, but is here today representing the Human Artistry campaign, which represents many different organizations, artist organizations, and is advocating for the interests of creatives as we see more AI developed. So I thought we could just kind of start our conversation off today with just situating how both of you have come at some of the developments we've seen in AI recently. Moiya, let's start with you. How has the Human Artistry campaign, what are you guys doing, and how are you interacting and kind of engaging with what's going on in these rapid advances in AI right now?
Yeah, so you said we're a group of many artist collections. We have 170 different members in more than 30 countries around the world. All of us are united under our desire for artists coming out triumphant in the face of generative AI. So the campaign firmly believes that AI has exciting potential for good and fun. Like, there's a lot of fun we can have with this stuff. But at the same time, we believe in two kind of uncontroversial statements. One is that you cannot steal from other people. That includes their possessions, their work, and their identity. And two, art is vital to humanity. And what we've seen is that generative AI is breaking both of those tenets. So the Human Artistry campaign has been working with a lot of policymakers and the AI developers themselves to make sure that artists are treated fairly, that they are compensated if their work is used in these models, and most importantly, that they can consent to having their work used in these models and that it's not just stolen from them. Yeah.
What about the BBC? How are you guys engaging with all this stuff that's happened in the past 2 years or so?
It's fascinating, isn't it? We talk about AI as if it's just happening right now. But for BBC, we've been working on AI and researching on AI for some time now. Be it about speech to text, be it about generating interesting images and things like that. So we've been ahead of the game in the media industry, researching and understanding what AI really means for the news and media industry. Certainly with Gen AI, it's yet another tool that's accelerating quite a lot of access to technology and capabilities that were not possible before. We are interested in understanding how AI can benefit the public service dimension within the UK, but also globally. But within the media industry, we are interested in understanding how AI can not only facilitate an improved discussion about technologies, but also how media can change and what kind of experiences we can create as a result of that. And certainly within the news industry, we are paying close attention to what that really means to bias and disinformation going forward.
And that was going to be my next question. I know right now I feel like when we talk about AI, a lot of people talk about these like very existential threats that seem very far away, you know, artificial general intelligence or that sort of stuff. But there are, you know, as you said, AI, it's not like AI has just burst on the scene, right? It exists, it is being used, and so there are threats today. Moiya, what are some of those threats that you see today in the creative industries?
Specifically in the creative industries, because I think it's really easy to get into like national security and deep fake things, but there's obviously the threat of loss of jobs. Generative AI can replace voice actors, musicians, designers, digital artists. There are so many jobs that can be replaced with AI, and I really don't want that to happen. But more than that, I am concerned about the threat to our culture as a society. Art is really important to our function as a thriving society. We need art to relate to other human beings. It helps us as a species become more empathetic with each other. Our society is better when there is art around, and generative AI already is kind of deteriorating the art landscape. We can see that with voice clones and image clones, audiences can lose faith in the content and the art that they consume. If they don't know that it's coming from their favorite artist, if they can't tell, they're less likely to trust that artist in the future. As an artist myself, if I see that someone can use generative AI to put out a book that looks exactly like something I would write, I wouldn't want to keep writing as much. And so I worry that generative AI is going to break down the relationship that humans have with art.
And I like that you also mentioned, you know, what people who are consuming that art, how that also affects them, right? And that loss of trust that can happen when you're like, oh, that's actually not Moiya that wrote that book, you know, even if it looks like her, right? Mm-hmm. And I think for the BBC, that's also, you know, you mentioned misinformation, right? It's that breakdown of trust that can happen when you do have AI in the equation.
Yeah, totally. And we've seen this quite a lot, especially during presidential elections or any kind of election in any country. We've seen how some of our content is misused and manipulated particularly on social media platforms. And that's a challenge that we saw 4 or 5 years ago. And now it's becoming even more challenging to control how our information is used, and particularly the hard work that the journalists put behind it in making sure that the information is as accurate as they can, and it can be trusted on the social media platforms. I think we're seeing that there needs to be more attention paid around how media can be verified on the social media platform, particularly ensuring that that trust relationship with the audiences is maintained on social media platforms. There are many organizations working on this at the moment. We initiated something called Project Origin a few years ago just to examine how we would protect our media on social media platforms. And since then, we've seen many technology organizations come together, developing technical standards to ensure that we can embed verifiable information in a piece of content when it appears on social media platform, so that at least when the media is surfaced on social media platform, it knows about where it's coming from, who it's coming from, and all the information associated with it. As you can see, with Gen AI tools, you can create absolutely anything, and you cannot tell a difference between fake and original.
But I guess even if you have that technology, there's also work that needs to be done about educating the public to be able to use those tools as well, especially, you know, like you were talking about.
Yeah, to use the tools and to use them responsibly, meaning make sure that they are only getting their training models from artists who have consented to have their work used and it's not being stolen. Transparency in the models is really important. Like, we need to know what data is going in and how it's being used, and labeling is really powerful. The individual companies can label them, but from the consumer perspective, you have to be media savvy and media literate to actually use these tools responsibly, and that's not easy for everyone to be. Not everyone has that training, and so I think the onus is on these AI developers to make their software accessible to everyone in a responsible way.
And how does the BBC think about that, engaging with the public in discussions about misinformation and helping them understand?
Totally. I think, you know, as many of you will know, BBC's mission is to inform, educate, and entertain. So that's part of the remit that we carry, where we want to make sure that we are providing enough information for public to get a better understanding of what this technology can and can't do, and what are the challenges and opportunities associated with it. We've been running campaigns for many years around introducing AI vocabulary in our output, but also providing and sharing challenging stories and also amazing creativity associated with it as well. So we've been running lots of campaigns around this topic. So it's not new, but certainly the pace at which the Gen AI tooling is evolving, we are not able to keep up with that pace, and we do need to make sure that we are working collaboratively with the media industry in ensuring that educational dimension does not disappear.
And in our conversation, you guys have mentioned many different stakeholders, right? There are the engineers who are out there who are actually creating the algorithms, right? There are artists, there are journalists, there are big organizations like the BBC, there's the public. How do we create or find a common approach to AI safety when you have all of these interests and actors in there?
You want to go first?
Jatin, you want to go first?
Yeah, I think this is super important, and I'm going to bring out a common thread between the discussion that we're having right now and what's happening at the Bletchley Park. So my colleague, Rebecca Finley, who's the CEO of Partnership on AI, is focusing on exactly that. A common global conversation about AI safety, a common standard way of understanding the challenges associated with it, and actually guidance for organizations to use and assess the risk that they're carrying. It has to be a multi-stakeholder conversation. It can't be just about tech organizations having a conversation amongst themselves, but bringing different voices from the industries on understanding the challenges and opportunities and developing frameworks that allows us to better understand and use AI technologies going forward. So I think Partnership on AI is one organization that's doing this, but there are many other organizations that are working on it. The important point I would make is it needs to be an open conversation. It needs to be a multi-stakeholder driven discussion.
Moiya, how do you see that?
It's a big topic because there are so many people interested, but since generative AI relies on artists' work to literally exist, I think that it needs to be an artist-focused and artist-centric solution. And I think that more information is always the way to go when you're dealing with a lot of people with varying opinions on something. And so more transparency in the models, more information to artists about how they can use these tools, but also more information to policymakers about how these tools work so that they can properly legislate, and more information to the tech companies about what goes into art. I'm a scientist, I am an artist, and I have always been really frustrated personally by the way that those two communities seem very siloed from each other. The artists don't often understand how the technology works, and the technologists don't often understand or appreciate the value of human art. And my job as the head advisor of the Human Artistry campaign is to bridge those gaps in understanding.
And so I'd love to dig into a little bit more about how the Human Artistry campaign engages with all of those. What does that look like? What does your day-to-day look like?
Yeah, it's very different. I have been talking to some policymakers, almost exclusively in the US. I've been talking to a lot of people in the music industry just to learn more about how it works and what the artists' individual interests are. I've been really encouraged by how broad the artists' opinions on AI are. Some of them are so excited to use this as a tool to make more art, and some of them don't want AI to touch their stuff at all. And so with regards to talking to policymakers, I wasn't personally involved with this, but I know that several members of the campaign were involved last year and earlier this year when the UK put out a proposal to have copyright exemptions for tech companies so that the AI developers could just scrape the internet and steal any of this content that they wanted. And our members pushed back on that, and we and others were successful. And so that's something that we're
Interesting.
doing.
So also finding those touch points where you can really engage and make a change. That's super interesting. Yeah, I find also with journalists, some people are really interested in engaging with what's going to happen with AI, and then some people are like, no, I really like the way that I'm working right now. I don't really want to talk about this, I don't really want to think about this. Do you feel that sometimes when you're working with teams?
Yeah, that pressure definitely is there. However, I think we see more openness in adopting newer ways of improving the work that we're already doing, but also things that we were not able to do before, we can now create those things as well. So, storytelling, we know that, any story that we tell, there's a start and the end. Well, nowadays you can have a different starting point and a different ending point. So I think there's a huge amount of creativity that we can capitalize on and create new stories around it. And similarly, for journalism, I think there's more attention to be paid around how we are gathering information and validating the source. There's a huge amount of effort going in ensuring that the sources are validated and the information can be trusted. But the tools can help us with that, but they can also be challenging for us, where new synthetic media can be created and it would be really, really difficult for us to verify a piece of content. But I see a lot of openness now, and there's definitely a sense of desire to engage with this topic more generally than we might have seen a few years ago.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we'll definitely see even like new jobs in journalism. Like, I think you'll probably have someone whose job it is to validate stuff that you might get sent, or you might have a fact checker who has to check stuff that's been written by AI.
Oh, you would need that, because it's not built to put out something that is accurate. It's built to put out something that it thinks you think looks accurate.
Yeah, completely.
Yeah.
And I think this is an important point, because BBC, again, has something called BBC Verify, and we pay a huge amount of attention in making sure that any content that we put out is verified. And there's huge amount of effort going in ensuring transparency, because we want that trust to be maintained, because it's very risky that if we don't pay attention to it, trust can deteriorate over time.
And I think the one question that I get asked all the time, because obviously I'm coming from the standpoint of looking at startups, everyone always says, oh, well, what are we going to do in this world where content is overflowing, where everyone can just switch on the tap and create lots of content marketing, images, whatever you want. And it's really interesting from a conversation today, I really feel even more strongly that relationship of trust and being able to show the consumers or readers or whoever those people are, watchers, listeners, that you have verified that they can trust that information is like such a great moat against an overflow of content, right?
Totally, and I think it's important to understand that we have to build a relationship given this new shift that we are observing around us. I use the analogy of internet and the e-commerce early 2000, where when we were using our credit card details online, we were not thinking about it. We were actually just giving our credit card information online, and now there's something called secure certificate that we just don't pay attention to because we take it for granted that it's secure, we trust it. But that has happened over time. It didn't happen in a year or 6 months. And I think it's a similar kind of shift that we will need to see and actually create conditions that we can build that relationship and trusted relationship, that the audiences pay attention but also can trust that what they're seeing is authentic. And that's why the work that we are doing within BBC, both from a journalism point of view, BBC Verify, but also technically, we want to make sure that our content is verifiable and authenticated so that people can trust it.
And I think also there's that relationship that needs to be built between artists and the tech companies as well, right? You mentioned when you were talking about the human artistry campaign at the beginning, consent, and building this world where artists have to opt in to be able to be included. How do we build that, and what does that look like?
Yeah, so the Human Artistry campaign was started by the music industry, the Recording Industry Association of America, but it did not stop at music. There are photographers, teachers, athletes, authors, writers. It's pretty broad, but we still think that the historical lessons that the music industry has learned from more recent events like streaming, and they keep talking about the Napster issue in these meetings, they have a model that I think applies or could be applied across all types of media. The licensing model that music currently has in place so that you can sample someone else's work or you can use someone else's lyrics if you want to cover a song, for example, that is a really effective model of getting another artist's permission before you use their work, and then it has a system to fairly compensate everyone involved. We can absolutely set something up like that for all of media, if we have companies, generative AI companies, that can take in all sorts of media.
That's so interesting. So I know in the past couple of years, you've seen lots of very high-profile court cases where people have come out and said, that song, actually, I need a credit on that song. Mm-hmm. So maybe you could even have that for an image, for a written text, mm-hmm. that sort of stuff.
Absolutely, but only if we know what art has been taken into these models.
Right.
Yeah. And it has, but like it does have to be opt-in instead of opt-out.
Yes.
Because it's already hard enough to be an artist without having to worry about tech companies stealing your work and then going out and searching all of the internet for every instance of that theft. It does have to be opt-in so that artists don't then have to do that work on the back end.
Yeah. How has the BBC thought about generative AI? I know you guys have published some guidelines and some principles around its use.
Yeah, we recently published our guidelines. It optimizes around creativity and talent, but also trust and transparency at the same time. It speaks to the value and obviously the remit that the BBC has as a public service organization. We believe human creativity and talent cannot be replaced, full stop. We can use these generative AI tools to improve efficiency, to create things that we were not able to create before. But absolutely, we subscribe to creativity and talent. Authentic storytelling, journalists standing up and talking about the work that they're doing and reporting on facts is super important. We do not believe that generative AI tools are the right answer in that context. Trust and transparency, again, I agree with the point that was been made, that emphasizing on transparency and making sure that the data that is used by any of these models is transparently available and auditable. I think often we forget that there needs to be method through which we can make sure that transparency can be adhered through. So I think those are the two important points. But we stand for acting on the public services point of view. So we want to make sure that any technology that we use, we are making it explicit that we are using either generative AI tools or we are not.
So if we can get a framework for AI safety in place, if we can create a system where artists have to consent to have their work used in generative AI models, if we can get all that out of the way, what are some of the interesting things or fun things or creative things that could come out in the future?
Well, I think there are many, many opportunities. I mean, I'm always curious about different experiences that we can create that were quite difficult many, many years ago. We're working on a couple of areas where we want to introduce certain experiences that we can make them available in virtual worlds, for example. Now that's possible through the technologies that we have access to, which would have been quite difficult for us many, many years ago. But also, we see a huge amount of interactivity with our content and services. So we want to improve the way our content is made available, but also allow for a level of interactivity that can facilitate an interesting discussion, but also provide more engagement for our audiences. So I definitely think that AI will play quite an important role in that context for us.
Yeah, I really like what you said about AI should be used to do things that we can't do ourselves right now. So there are really exciting applications in music, taking a song and separating it into its different tracks after the case. We've been doing this with old Beatles songs so that we can remix and master them with separate tracks. In writing, I love to read and visualize the scenes myself. And I wouldn't want AI to create like a movie based on a book, because we have humans who can make movies based on books, but something that is interactive or personalized would be really cool. Like if I could read a book and then an AI could generate a visual stream that is personalized to me and the way that I envision the world, that'd be sick, right? But it does have to be, I think, interactive and personalized, and something that is not capable, not possible with current human artist technology.
Yeah, I think that's a really good framework to look at it through. We have a couple of minutes left if we have some questions. It's like super dark. Anyone have any questions? I see someone, yes.
It's me again. A couple of questions. Again, I'll preface it that I'm techno-optimist. So actually the first question to you is actually leading on from what you just mentioned. Just imagine if you had an up-and-coming artist that had the ability to create a song on the fly for somebody that's just broken up, and his or her lyrics are used to basically help that person get over that breakup, right? So you're allowing, instead of the person going to a very specific artist, that's known for having songs that are about Adele or whatever, is able to basically have something personalized. Wouldn't that be a good outcome for the artist also? That's my first question. The second one is, there's regulatory arbitrage with Japan saying that copyright is not going to be enforced for training of AI. How do you look at it in the context of the work that you're doing when there's going to be regulatory arbitrage between different countries?
I don't think art is about the product or the outcome. I think art is more about the process. And that person who just went through a breakup, there are thousands of breakup songs that already exist or that are currently being written where you can see the pain and the reflection that an artist does or goes through to put into that song. And I think that is way better and way easier to relate to than something that was just generated on the fly, even if it's then performed by a human artist. So I do think that that's not I'm not drawn in by that application. And for the copyright exemptions, I don't think that these companies should be allowed to steal artists' work without any repercussions just because they are trying to advance technology. There are plenty of ways to lean into and even support the progress of AI technology without leaning into or without threatening art. Like there are other applications. We just don't need to touch art in this way.
What about the regulatory arbitrage? That's probably interesting for you guys as well, because your content's being shared all around the world, right?
Well, it's a challenge. At the moment, as soon as we publish anything on the internet, we do not have any control over our content. And that's quite challenging because that can be used in all sorts of different ways. And hence, we don't subscribe to open scraping method at the moment. And I think the regulatory dimension will need to think really, really hard on the approach and the implication of that on organizations like the BBC and any news and media organization that serves to the public.
If I can just say one more thing, I think that every country should be proud of the media that their artists produce. So many of the best shows in the US are just adaptations of British shows. And so I don't understand why a country wouldn't want to invest in and support its human artists that are putting out content that other people around the world can relate to and that forms those really strong connections across borders just to have a temporary potential lead in AI tech.
Yeah. Well, we are out of time right now, but thank you so much to both our panelists for a fascinating conversation. I feel like I learned a lot. And thank you so much to everyone for joining us today.